Good afternoon or good morning. I'm Randy Horton, Chief Solutions Officer at Orthogonal. Very briefly, a few words about Orthogonal. We are a firm in software development consulting that helps improve patient outcomes faster by helping MedTech companies accelerate their development of software as a medical device, connected device systems, and digital therapeutics. And the way we do that is by taking the best of modern product management and software engineering tools and techniques as developed in industries besides MedTech, really more early tech industries, and fusing that with our industry's focus on safety and effectiveness to basically create better devices than ever before, more connected and powerful devices, but still more safe and effective than we've ever been able to do before. I think a lot of you know we do this as a monthly webinar. We convene experts from the industry, from a variety of places to gather and share best practices, really in an effort to help all of us improve patient outcomes faster. This is scheduled for an hour and a half, but stay 50 minutes. So my time from noon to 12:50 Eastern time, and we will get in all the core topics we promised you and hopefully some questions. However, if there's additional questions or discussion from the audience and you keep feeding us stuff, we are more than happy to go up to a full 90 minutes, frequently go, I would say an 80 or so, and we have a pretty good group of people who stick around. So our goal today is really, we're trying to pack about 4 hours of content into 50 minutes for you and have you leaving with some good discussion and some gold nuggets of insights that hopefully you can take back and use for your work. Really all related to this concept of shift left. Two other quick things. First of all, we really value feedback on these webinars. We do them every month, and we'd like to hear more from people about, yeah, it's great to hear what you like, and that's wonderful. It makes us feel good, but we'd also like to know why you like certain things or what you didn't like or what we could do better or what topics we'd like to hear. To that end, you will be hearing from me. You may get a phone call from me or an email or a LinkedIn message or a fax. And if you do, I'd appreciate it if you could take the call and give us some feedback, because really it's the best way we can make things better for you. Second of all, because apparently it's not always clear and I've been told to be explicit, these challenges we're discussing today with shifting left and using that to accelerate SaMD development and all these related bonuses, these are things that Orthogonal can help you with. We develop software with MedTech companies. We also help them improve their internal processes and capabilities around these things. So please give us a call if you'd like to discuss any of this. And I'm sure Jennifer can tell you also what she can help you with as we get along here. So very quickly, I'm not going to define the concept of shift left here, but to suffice to say, it's been around over 20 years now. Actually, I guess we're almost coming up on 25 years with this as a principle really in coming out of software engineering and all kinds of other process-based engineering. It's very powerful and it's slowly caught on in MedTech. A lot of the work we're doing right now, I would very much define as shift left. And if I look at what people are interested in talking about, particularly starting about Q2 of this year moving forward, a lot of it is really related to how do we shift left and do better with our processes? How can we produce more and better software? But also I was at a conference in June, the Medical Device Software Development Summit in Boston, and it really blew me away because literally, I think over 50% of the speakers had the word shift left in their slide and used it in their discussion. I was kind of like, well, this is great. This is really permeating. It was how do we shift left with regulatory or risk or this or that? And then all of a sudden I started picturing a seesaw with like 50 kids on one side and one person on the other, 50 on the left and one on the right. It's like, well, can you shift everything left at a certain point? Are you saying that 75 people in your organization need to be involved in everything from day one, including initial conception meetings in order to shift left? Does 75 people have to be involved with picking the food order, for a team dinner, those kinds of things? And that's really what brought this conversation is, what is shift left? How does it work in MedTech? What's unique? And what are some best practices and how to prioritize what you shift left? Because it's not a binary all or nothing. I think it's a process and a learning curve, and it probably differs for every organization and every device. So with that, I'm going to welcome our speakers and ask each of them to give a bit of a background. So I'd like to welcome first honored guest Jennifer Newberger. She's a director at the law firm of Hyman, Phelps, and McNamara. She's focused exclusively on the medical device regulatory landscape, and she has all kinds of cool experience in her background. So Jennifer, maybe you could take a minute and fill us in on that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. As Randy said, I'm a director at Hyman, Phelps, and McNamara. I focus on medical device issues, so that's software, SaMD, software with hardware, though there's very few devices these days that don't have some element of software. I spent about a decade at law firms in DC, a short stint at FDA, and then I went in-house for about 7 years. I was at Apple and helped get those first couple de novos across the board there. Was at Abbott and most recently at a startup company, and recently rejoined Hyman Phelps a few months ago. So thank you for having me today.
All right, Larkin.
Hi. Yeah, I spent good 30 years of my life in the software space, largely doing software organization turnarounds and building new software organizations. I've been very focused on productivity, increasing the rate of value delivery and just overall efficiency of product development processes, which is why I'm really excited to be talking about this topic today. I spent really the vast majority of that career outside of MedTech, and then about 5 years ago got pulled in and haven't looked back. It's been a blast operating within the medical device space. But 5 years ago, I actually hired Orthogonal to help me out at a company I was engaged by. And it's been actually a really good experience working with Orthogonal.
I always think of that Gillette commercial. You like the razor so much you bought
Yeah,
the company.
that's pretty much it.
Bernard.
Orthogonal been in software for good 30 years or so. Started.
But we can't hear you, Bernard.
How about now?
Yes,
It
there you
always
go.
happens. Sorry, guys. Bernhard Kappa. I'm the founder and CEO of Orthogonal. Started Orthogonal about 12 or 13 years ago. Really focused on bringing modern software development practices into the medical device world. Really, I think of everything that we do in terms of fast feedback loops. How do we increase those? How do we bring those the benefits of those into this regulated space? And that's the journey we've been on over the last 15 years or so with our clients, building all kinds of pretty cool and beneficial products. And now you're on mute, Randy.
Terrific. Well, thank you all. This is a great group. Okay, so before we talk about what is shift left, let's talk about a second about the problem we're trying to solve. And generally people say in projects, oh, I wish you would involve me earlier on from my expertise for X, because I could have saved you all this pain and repeat. I think that's that's the heart of one of the symptoms of shift left. But Jennifer, you had this great LinkedIn post when you reposted this webinar that I wanted to quote, because I thought maybe you could talk about it for a second as your perspective of what are the kinds of pain that happen when the right people aren't involved at the right points in the process. How do you decide when to bring teams like regulatory and legal into the product development process? I'm thrilled to participate in this webinar about shifting left to discuss this question. I once had somebody tell me, quote, regulatory doesn't design products, unquote. Join us to hear what I think about that. All right, so what do you think about that?
So look, regulatory does not design products, but regulatory has to have a say in what the final product is going to look like, especially when that product is SaMD. And so much of the product is the UI. And as I'm sure everybody on this webinar knows, a difference of a word here or there can be the difference between not being regulated by FDA, being a device, being a drug, being a general wellness product. There's a lot of distinctions and nuance in the language. And so I think the idea that regulatory doesn't design products, that it sort of comes later, right? It's sort of a take what we give you and then figure out how to get it through. And we'll talk more about this, of course, but that isn't going to work, because by the time you come to regulatory with what you think is a fully baked product, regulatory is going to say, well, that's going to create a lot of complexities, and here's why. So it's not a straight yes, no. I would definitely not give a product to me to design. I would do a terrible job at it. But certainly coming for feedback earlier rather than later can help the folks who are doing the actual design something that will be great both from the user perspective, create a clear path forward from the regulatory side, and not overcomplicate things.
Thank you. Larkin, so can you take Jennifer's kernel there about the mistake of keeping regulatory out and too late and broaden that into, in general, a range of stakeholders? And let's just even, this doesn't emerge from MedTech, so let's stay above MedTech, and then I'll ask Bernhard to kind of boil it down to what's different in MedTech. What are we trying to solve here, and does it really work? Is it a magic bullet?
Well, I mean, there are no magic bullets, but you know, the challenge, you know, as Jennifer was saying, right, and with the quote of, you know, a regulatory doesn't design a product, you know, we end up in these situations where somebody is largely designing the product in a somewhat of a vacuum, right? You have a set of assumptions that you have a set of beliefs that you have about the client, the customer base, whatever it is, market, and what the technology can do, and how you're actually going to get it cleared. And then you're gambling, right? And you get to the end, and then you're going to ask your regulatory team, you're going to ask your sales and marketing team, okay, you guys have to get this thing cleared. You have to be able to sell it to the customers. Go figure out how to polish up this thing that we made and make it commercially viable, right? And at that point, you've already made a ton of decisions. You've already poured a lot of concrete in your designs. And, you know, if you're doing manufacturing, it's, you know, there's a lot that you just can't very easily do over. And you end up basically modifying and hacking away at that product in order to chisel it into a shape that can be acceptable by the marketplace, right? Or the regulators or whoever else has to approve this thing. What we're talking about with Shift Left is bringing some of that feedback earlier into the process so that we can design and build a product which is actually the best product that it can be given the constraints that we have, whether it's regulatory or market constraints or whatever. And we're building an optimal product from the very beginning, instead of trying to come up with something that we can all live with by deferring these decisions to the end. And, you know, part of where Shift Left came in for me was in the sort of introduction of Agile in the world, and the concept that Bernhard repeats over and over again, which is, you know, fast feedback loops, right? It's all about taking those assumptions, which we can never fully get away from, and try to not to be valid. So, you know, whether it is in a regulated space like medical device, or it's purely a commercial, you know, non-regulated product, you know, everybody faces the same challenge of validating your assumptions. And I think this is what Shift Left is addressing.
Thank you. So Bernhard, building that on Jennifer and Larkin, can you ground us in what's different about shifting left in regulated industries or MedTech in specific? Because like everything else, we tend to we're the same as everybody else, just more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think all of these are concepts that are, you know, generally applicable, right? You know, the Shift Left really started in software testing and DevOps, right? Very specific to how we do software. Shift Left meaning at that point, shift the testing earlier so you catch more bugs, deal with those bugs earlier, don't have bugs hiding behind the bugs, etc. All of those things that allow you to you know, correct things as you're going along, right? And that was the whole point of it. And you can then abstract it and apply it to other things that when you do them earlier, you do those things when it's cheaper and easier to do those things. So that could be around requirements, that could be usability testing, that could be anything in the software development process, or the software development lifecycle, or the product development lifecycle, right? So we can think of all kinds of things if we abstract that that sort of concept and apply it to a product development effort, right? What is different in the medical device space? It's simply we have a set of constraints that are different than in other things, and that make it challenging to shift certain things left, right? I think that's the biggest thing. So what are those? Well, certainly we have to make a determination at some point. Is this a medical device? Is this not a medical device? What kind of clearance might we need? What kind of evidence do we need? What kind of evidence do we need for the regulators? What kind of evidence might we need for reimbursement? Those are all constraints that we have to deal with within what we're doing, right? The quality systems regulations is another set of constraints. That doesn't mean we can't do this. We just have to take those considerations into consideration when we are thinking about ways to shift left.
So let's good context. By the way, for the audience, please start submitting questions. We will get to them throughout as we can. We're just laying a little groundwork right now. Okay, so classic story. I once heard of an old big tech company, not a current big tech company, that was so siloed in every way that they once showed up for a sales call with a CIO and 15 people walked into the room because they had to have the middle market person and the manufacturing person, the horizontal person, and the printer people and the server people, and the consulting people. Everybody had to be in the room. It was obviously absurd and did not go well or impress anybody. So I'm going to share here a slide of the 15 functions that we've identified as key functions in creating a medical device within a medical device corporation. And let's talk about that. Like, I assume we're not saying, I know we're not saying, you get all 15 people and they're involved lockstep and everything. So let's talk about what you do. 1 second, let me share this. And credit goes for this slide to Larkin, who put this together for a prior presentation. Everybody can see it? Yes. All right, so tactically, you're starting a new medical device. I don't know, pick a phase early on and tell me, who do you bring in? Who do you not? How do you know?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I put this slide together originally was as training material for development teams. And the reason that I was trying to communicate this to them is I want the people that are participating in the product development process to understand who the other parties are that they need to be aware of, right? And to Randy's point, we're not necessarily involving all of these people in every meeting or even having a single meeting with everybody in a room, but we need to make sure that everybody knows who everybody else is that they need to be interacting with at some point during the process, and be able to understand what the motivation is of the other party. Why does the other party care? What's their involvement? What are they doing? What is their responsibility? What are they contributing to the overall process? And as members of the team come together for say a new development and getting to know everybody, it's part of that sort of team building exercise for any cross-functional team to get to know everybody, right? And why they're there, and what how you're going to interact with them, and what you need from them, and what you need to be able to give to them. So I like for the participants in cross-functional teams to think about this list, think about the questions that are being asked or the role that they're playing, and try to get to understand those other functions well enough so that they're able to interact and communicate effectively with them.
And so it might be useful to just sort of look at a specific group early on. Why not regulatory early on, right? So let's talk about when you are in concept stage for a product. You need to, there's a couple of things that you probably need to look at, right? What markets do you think you're going to be in for this product? What regulatory authorities do you need to deal with? The other part is, how is this going to get paid for? What is the business model around that? So these are all things that are going to be some of the considerations you have as you're sort of getting something through and figuring out whether it's internal green light or raise funding or whatever it happens to be that you're whether you're a startup or you are, within a larger company, right? So that, and certainly is there a clinical benefit here? And what's it going to take to get that, right? Those are all the questions that you have as you're going through this, and that's where you want to involve those experts early on, not in minute detail, but enough where you can leverage that expertise to see that. So at that point, it's a pretty early stage. Similarly, legal privacy could be at this stage, or it could be a little bit later. Certainly at the point when you are starting to build something out, or as you move along, you want to know and understand what they care about and what their considerations are. And sometimes they can be surprising to you as to in a company what legal might actually care about. And so finding that out early, who who are problem solvers within legal, who cares about particular things, and just get to know them and what it is that they care about is super important, because those are constraints, and then you'll know based on that when and how frequently you might want to engage them in the process, so you don't end up with a project stopped late in the process because you didn't inform legal of something important, right? Or
So,
you didn't consult them on it.
so let's continue with legal and regular. Jennifer, I'm going to put you in the hot seat here. So
Yeah.
So
I was just going to say, I mean, I think that's exactly right. The way I think of this is sort of like the first meeting is kind of the watch out meeting, the things that the various teams are going to say, just keep an eye out for this, right? It's not where regulatory or legal, who are often, thought of as the teams that are saying no all the time. And I don't think that that's what the point of this is, right? The point is to say, okay, I hear your sort of broad concept for a product. Sounds great. Understand the need. That's cool. Here are the things that I'm going to be thinking about throughout this process, or later in this process when you come to me with something that's a little bit more developed, so that as the product team, the engineering teams, the R&D teams, whoever it is in that particular organization that's responsible for thinking about the build, the design, they can think, oh, you know what? Jennifer said to me at that first meeting that I'm going to need to be thinking about this, or that I'm going to need to be thinking about, what my clinical studies are going to be. And I know clinical was on there, but of course it overlaps really closely with regulatory, right? I'm going to need to be thinking about, how are we going to prove it? Maybe we don't want to say it does these 5 things. We'll start with 1. Like, what's the one thing that we want to focus on? And so I really think I think you can have a first meeting that really does have all these teams, right? With the high level product design concept, where each of the teams is saying, from my perspective, here's what I will be thinking about down the road, so that you are giving those product development teams what they need to hopefully start to iterate on a product that when it does come to you 3-6 months, whatever it is later, they've taken into account what you have said, so that you're not caught off guard at that stage.
So let me ask a question, and this will be my contrarian to explain to me. So that's great, but does that get us to an 80-20? That 80% of the issues that you should know about happen and 20 don't? And if I'm the program manager, here's my fear. So tell me how to manage you as a member of this team with this fear, which is that there's 1,000,000,001 decisions that get made every day. You're extremely busy, right? You probably don't want to be on every Slack thread, Slack channel going on in this and be monitoring it. You probably don't want to have to opt in and do stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that happens between major deliverables and major milestones. And last time I got burned, Jennifer, because I didn't ask the right question, so I didn't get the right answer because I didn't know it, because there's a reason I didn't go to law school and I became a PMP, right? God bless you for doing it, but I don't want to do it. So how do I get that extra 20% or as much of that as possible? It's the nuance of life and projects and devices.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's not a perfect answer, and nobody's going to have every answer to every question exactly when they need it. And I think there just has to be some acceptance of that. But I do think, if you have good program managers, project managers from the beginning, you have these meetings, you come together, you sort of lay out what this project is going to look like, right? And maybe that's a couple-day launch meeting or whatever it may be. And you're laying out those sort of key decision points from each of the teams, right? That sort of helps put like a roadmap together for this is how we're thinking about this project. These are the key decision points. And then I'm gonna say, I mean, you're right. I don't want to be involved if I don't need to be involved. Some people want to be involved all the time. I have no interest and I don't have the time. Like I want to be there when I need to be there, but not otherwise. And so I think if you lay out those key decision points, if you track it in something that people can access so that, you know, maybe I say like, all right, let me see actually how this is going or where they are in progress right now, or that emails are sent out and you can read them when you have time. I think that at least helps set up what is expected to be discussed, decided, determined by what stage, and who needs to be involved at those critical junctures. Again, I don't think it's a perfect solution, but in my experience, that's about as good as we can do.
Make the joke. What's the line? You know, democracy is the worst possible political system, except for all the other alternatives.
That's right.
Okay, so let's shift this a little bit, because a lot of times our conversations naturally happen around when you're developing a product. But you know, as Orthogonal preaches all the time, your device is never done these days. You could be doing a PCCP update every 2 weeks. You know, you have cybersecurity post-market monitoring, you have new integrations, you have iPhone upgrades, you have all this stuff. So you've got this whole band of 15 functions we've identified. How do you keep them looped in when you're past the big build, but you're sort of in this continuous grind of what's new, planned and unplanned?
I kind of think of this as, so, you know, if we're talking about shifting left this, right this, there's the other concept of left of bang, if anyone has ever read that book, which is about kind of the Marine Corps and basically, you know, the process, what you do to left of bang is before the bang, the explosion, et cetera, happens, right? What are the things you can do before that, and what is the mindset and the operational approach, which is very much of a, you know, look at the signals and try to prevent that bang. I think there's a lot of that, because ultimately, if we're thinking, why are we shifting left? We're trying to avoid bad things that end up costing money, costing time, creating potentially liability for the company, creating bad outcomes for patients, right? We want to avoid those things. So there's you can look at this as not just what you're doing during development, but if you can think about what are the things you can do to get better signals earlier about anything that can happen during your product life cycle. How can you design that, getting that information into your product or into your infrastructure so that before it happens, you have ways of dealing with that. Cybersecurity, for example, is all about that, right? There is work that you're doing during the design and development process to reduce those risks and those attack surfaces. But then there's also designing and monitoring and things that you can do in production as well for those things. That is, you know, that is really, you know, you can think of all of that as a way of shifting left, getting those signals earlier and already having things prepared for how you might deal with those things when they happen.
So that, I think, you know, describes kind of the end state, right, of all of the different things to consider and what you need to be, you know, responding to, et cetera. But I do want to just touch back on something that Jennifer brought up, which is, I think, probably the most important concept in this entire webinar, really, which is, you know, when she said that, okay, I know you have 5 things that you're thinking about. Pick the one thing that is the most important and let's figure that one out, or at least start there, right? And once we have a good handle on that one important thing, let's go to the second most important thing, right? And so if you are constantly in a mode of evaluating what the most important things are, good prioritization, what is going to be providing the best, you know, the most benefit to the patients, what's going to be providing the most benefit to the company, what are the key areas of risk, right? How can we cause patient harm or commercial damage, right? Like, what are the most important things to be focusing on conceptually and working your way down, as opposed to, being caught up. Engineers in particular love to get wrapped around the axle on minutia. It's in our nature. I'm one. I do it all the time, and we have to be able to resist that urge. And so, anyway, I think what the approach that Jennifer described is incredibly important and valuable, very valuable.
So we just got a very timely question here from somebody who's well positioned to ask it. Tony Watson, who's had a pretty illustrious career in regulatory and quality. And before that, I believe, is a Annapolis graduate, was an officer in the Navy. So as we're talking about left to bang, Tony says it's two things. One thing he sees is not many companies really have an integrated development process that shows the involvement of the various functions, the people in those slides at the right times. And he makes a comment, the IDP should track with a business go, no-go decision. So ultimately, it rolls up to, is the business prepared to keep investing or not? What is your experience with that approach, and does that help you organize who and when?
I can chime in, and then I'm sure others will have things to say. Hi, Tony. Glad you're on. So yes, I think like the concept of the go, no go list, and that's kind of like at the beginning when you get everybody together and you say, what do we need to get this thing done? You make that list, and that does go into the details of every deliverable, everything that needs to be had, and who, by whom, and by when. And I think that does help really organize the tasks that need to be done. I have seen this work very successfully. You have to have somebody who's really on top of it, right? That it is their job to like manage that go, no go, be on top of the people who have due dates coming up, get the tasks done, make sure that you're meeting those timelines. But that really does help show that full end-to-end list. And as you're going through it, you'll say, oh, we missed this, we forgot that, you added in, right? But I think having those details and the step-by-step of who owns what by when can be really successful if you have the right people to do it. That is a job that I would be terrible at managing, but have worked with some really capable people. So it's just a matter of finding the right folks.
I'm curious, do you identify with, well, let me ask a loaded question. Of those 15 stakeholders, have you ever worked with any on a device who are perfectly good and competent, but perhaps not aligned with the ultimate business goals?
Perfectly good and competent, but not aligned with the ultimate business goals. I mean, I think sometimes it is hard to actually figure out what those ultimate business goals are, right? And I actually don't think that the 15 people on the list are the ones that necessarily set those business goals, right? And so I think that there's sort of a step that comes first, which is, what are the goals? Why are we doing this, right? And I think the product owner talked about, I think it said like, the value, but I think there is a step above that that's sort of coming from on high, if you will, for lack of a better way to describe it, but like from an E-team that says like, this is our goal. This is why we're doing this. This is why we're important. And then this is why this is important. And then those 15 people are the ones that execute on it. So I don't think I've seen it about sort of not being aligned with the business goals. I think it's more, you get folks from all different kinds of backgrounds who maybe haven't worked in medical device space before, right? And have really fantastic ideas for like what a product should be, but have like no idea what the impact is from a regulatory perspective. And I think that has been where it can be harder sometimes to get everybody aligned. So it's less business goal and more just like process, if you will.
I would say that if you think about things like sort of lean startup, business model, canvas, all of those types of things, right? Where ultimately you need a whole bunch of hypotheses validated in order to end up with a business model or a product that fits within your business model that works, right? So the whole concept there of shift left in that context is you're doing rapid hypothesis testing. You are working towards things in this within a process. Maybe you're managing a portfolio and you're trying to prove or disprove those hypotheses as quickly as possible, and then make decisions based on that, whether you should go forward or not go forward on something. I've seen this especially with I've seen this with startups where they miss, for example, some of the critical things around reimbursement and assume reimbursement is just going to happen. But the reality is that it's a really difficult road for certain things, and you find that out very late in the process as opposed to early in the process. You could have spent a whole bunch of money when the project probably needed to be shelved or killed or something like that, not because it's not creating value for patients in the abstract, but because no one can make any money at it, right? And then I think with the opposite danger happens with large corporations um, where late on in the process, it's really hard to kill a project that a bunch of people have put time and money into, because ultimately, it people's jobs are on the line, and it's a lot easier to sort of keep going, even though you are collecting evidence that says we should stop this thing, or we should really change path. That's really difficult to do. If you can bring that shift left mindset in, and you have the right structure so that it's okay to kill projects when the evidence is correct, you're in a much better position. But that's really difficult to do within a corporate structure.
So one thing maybe we can talk about is some tactical things that you can do in terms of managing your shift left, right? Because we're talking about a lot of the things that that we need to be considering, a lot of the costs and penalties of getting things wrong, and when we're dealing with these things at the wrong time. So maybe I'll just share briefly kind of a strategy that I like to take, which is during the requirements development process, right? Maybe you've already identified largely your user and business needs, and now you're into developing your high level requirements. I like to have a number of metrics that I'm managing. Like back in the old days, would have done this by putting butcher block paper on the walls and Post-it notes everywhere and whatever. Nowadays, we're using tools like Miro or Notion or something like that to do this. But I like a Kanban process with cards, and for each card, I will have a number of metrics that I'm recording to help me understand the value and the risks and unknowns associated with whatever the feature is that I'm trying to design here. And so I'll have a clinical value score, right? Is this high clinical value, low clinical value? Maybe it's my password reset has no clinical value at all whatsoever, right? I'll have a commercial value. How does this feature impact the bottom line? Is it something that is going to produce a lot of value commercially, or is it something that nobody really cares about, but we have to have for some other reason? So clinical value, commercial value. I'll have a score for cybersecurity risk, right? Is this feature likely to introduce cybersecurity risk? Yes, no. I'll have high, maybe, yes, maybe, or no on scores like that. Have a score for data privacy, for example. Am I handling sensitive data with this feature? Do I have high risk or not? So the initial set of scores that you're going to add in here to your metrics are really meant to give you a broad brush, dart throwing kind of guess. And what I try to get my teams to do is to have a small group of people developing these requirements, and we want them to kind of channel those other SMEs, right? What would legal say? What would regulatory say? What would the clinical people say? And make a guess. And it's just kind of high, medium, and low in terms of the guess. And you'll be able to identify areas where you don't really know, right? You have a lot of uncertainty in these areas. Now you have to go ask a bunch of questions. There could be other areas where you're pretty darn confident that you have the answers, and maybe you'll defer bringing in the SMEs until a little bit later when things have consolidated. But really, for the areas where you now have uncertainty, you're going to want to bring in those SMEs earlier. So I think being able to, as you're doing the requirements development, to have a bunch of metrics which are, recorded, they're easily viewable by all of the different parties, they can be discussed, really helps to understand when you should bring people in, what you need from them at that particular stage, but also give the skilled teams. I mean, these are all skilled teams that we're bringing together. They can kind of guess whether or not legal is going to have a problem with an issue or not. and do a reasonably good job guessing at these things. And so we want to give them the ability to make some of those educated guesses, but still have kind of the working set available so that when we have to bring them in, we can get those answers quickly.
And I think sort of the next step then is, when you bring the SMEs in, it's like, what's it going to cost you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if there's a feature that is really important for some particular reason, but is going to decrease the likelihood of we'll call it an easy clearance. Don't really seem to be many of those anymore, but we'll call it that, right? How valuable is that feature? Or can we put it aside for now, do something simpler, help facilitate the clearance process, and then build it out later, go back, et cetera, once the agency's had a chance to get familiar with the technology, right? It's that sort of cost benefit. And so I think, Larkin, that's exactly what you were getting at, that some of these will be really important because you need it for commercialization, or you need it for reimbursement, or you need it for privacy, or whatever it may be. But there might be other things that are like, we really, really want it, but it is not a must-have. And I think like that distinction, if you really, really want it and it's an easy thing to get, great. But if you really, really want it and it's going to complicate other things, put it aside. And there has to be an acknowledgement that it's all just like, it's a game to a certain extent, right?
I will say that, right, we do a lot of SaMD and connected device development projects with different customers and things under our quality management system, our customers' quality management systems. And there are certainly things that we see along the way that are patterns that we try to, at least in terms of our integrated development approach, sort of make sure we have these as, if nothing else, they're checklist items. Hey, during this phase, this. Sometimes we run across something new where we haven't run across it, and we add to that, right? We do this around, for example, lots of edge cases for Bluetooth, right? We have a huge library of those. Not all apply to all kinds of things, but we can go through that. And while we're not going to get 100%, we're going to cover an awful lot of the stuff, and we keep adding to that. The same thing applies to all of these other things that you can, as you do more projects, you run across those things, and you can say, hey, for regulatory in the US, we care about XYZ. For reimbursement, we care about XYZ. For legal actually cares about this thing during the verification process. They have questions around data and what kind of data we're using and how we're using that data. Maybe not everyone, but we've run across that in cases, so that we have those and we can put those as for the project team as a continual improvement of our integrated development process.
Yeah, and one thing that you touched on really, I think is important, which is transparency, right? So all of these different roles are having to basically lay all their cards out of the table. Everybody has to see what everybody else's cards are. And so when it comes to those, sort of guidance documents that you're talking about, Bernhard, right? Like everybody needs to be sharing that content, and it needs to be completely accessible to everybody on the team.
Yeah, I think it can be also like one of the challenges, right, when you are doing a modern agile development process, you have people that are on the project day to day, every day, right? There's the pigs and there's the chickens. If you are basically, let's say, a privacy expert, right? And that is you're an SME on this, and you get pulled in, you may have 30 projects that you are dealing with, right? How do you get, there's no way to be in the trenches every day on 30 projects. So how do you get enough knowledge into the team so that they can make a lot of sort of educated guesses, decisions, and know when to pull you in? I think that's part of the process there, and part of sort of getting it into things like checklists and into, critical checks, and making those critical checks earlier in the process where feasible, right?
So let's, two related questions on that. In terms of right person, right time. One, and I think this is not just a MedTech Agile problem, although it gets pronounced stronger here. A lot of shift left is figuring out who's the right person to ask the right question of at the right time to get the right answer so you can keep moving. Okay, we've talked about right time. We've talked about right question. With 15 departments involved, how do you make sure you got the right person and that they actually know what they're talking about, or they're authorized? Because one thing I've seen is where you do have somebody on the team and they're doing a great job from some department as liaison, and then their boss sees it 4 months later. It's like, whoa, I didn't say any of this.
That's an excellent question. Randy, do you have an answer to that one?
No, but I thought I'd do something unfair, which would be to ask Larkin or Jennifer, if you're overseeing a team of architects or you're the general counsel and you've got more junior people delegated, how do you keep yourself as the senior person engaged, or make yourself, how do you work with that team? Is it all indirect? What do you do? Because to the same point, it's happening all the time, right? You're getting called in, you might be getting called in on quick things. So how do you, as the leader of that group, ensure that the answer is coming from your delegates in these scenarios, since it's not a big review at the end? What do you do?
Well, in my case, it's all about sourcing the right people, right? And having a criteria when you're sourcing the SMEs. So if you need to involve legal, and everybody does, right? You have to ask for something specific. You can't just go to the legal department and says, hey, I need a lawyer. Go give me a lawyer, right? You're going to say, I need somebody to be able to do this for me, right? And that's going to involve, I need somebody who can make decisions about X, whatever the topic is. And you need to be able to get a resource who is empowered to represent that particular role and function. It gets a little bit tricky, especially very large companies where you have a lot of sort of gaps that you're talking about, Randy, where it takes time for activities to sort of bubble up to places where they may end up getting caught at some point by one of the leadership who decides to disagree with what the underling has done. That's if anybody has an answer to that problem, I'd love to hear. I haven't come up with a good solution to that one yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think for mine, I'm not sure I have a good solution to it, but I think obviously law firms is a little bit different. But when I was in-house, I mean, part of it is just hopefully you've made good hiring decisions and you have the right people on your team to answer the questions. But we all know sometimes that goes well and sometimes it doesn't, and you don't find out till too late. So putting that piece aside, I mean, part of it is you have to have like regular check-ins with your team. And I know sometimes you can look at your calendar and think, oh my God, I have 6 hours of one-on-ones today. Like this is a total waste of my day, right? And so again, some of that depends on the person. But I think part of it is first figuring out like when that, when the team is doing the resourcing, Larkin, to your point, like it's good for the leader, whoever is sort of overseeing the team that's answering the question, to at least understand what it is that they're asking for and make sure that they're putting the person on it who probably knows the most. And then I think it's those regular check-ins where like I would expect people on my team to come and tell me like, what have they been working on in the last week? How are things progressing? Do they have any questions? And part of it is also that like, ask me the stuff that you think is stupid. Like, I don't care. Like a lot of it is just having that person to bounce ideas off of. And you always want to make sure that the team understands that you are that person, right? And like, I would rather know sooner than later. That's the other thing, right? Like, come to me with the stuff because we don't want the other team to then 6 months from now think we don't know what we're talking about, right? That's bad for the whole group. So I think it's just that relationship building and making sure that there's always that open door to be like, come, you don't have to wait also till the one-on-one. Like, just like I would say, come knock on my door, but that doesn't happen anymore. So whatever it is, right? Pick up the phone and just have the conversation and ask the questions, resolve the issues.
Right. And I think, an important point there is, we're building cross-functional teams. We're not establishing relationships with somebody we're going to throw a document to over the fence, right? We are integrating them into our day-to-day. And you do get into a challenge where you are asking some other department, some other supervisor to say, lend me a body. They need to be part of my team. I'm providing them direction. Supervisor says, well, wait a minute. That person is my responsibility. I provide them direction. So it does require, getting everybody on the same page that this sort of cross-functional team building is a thing, and we have to all cope with it together. But also making sure that the leadership part. So just as a joke, I really shouldn't say this, but I had one of my team syncs where I got the sort of the leaders of the different SME groups together, and I called ourselves the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, because it was the 4 directors of the different departments where now it's pulling everybody together. But you do have to do that, right? The leadership does need to have a sync and not be completely insulated from what their people are doing in those cross-functional teams outside of their direct supervision. So, it's making sure, the people that are actually doing the work have to be working together and collaborating as a single cross-functional team unit. But their management, who is responsible for them, they need to be syncing, at a level up or 2.
So, related question. Let's flip this up. By the way, it is 12:51, so thank you for those of you who've joined us. I think we've answered all the core questions. There is one question on the side we haven't gotten to that we will get to. And as a reminder, want your feedback, you'll hear from me. Please pick up the phone or reply to the email and tell me. And if you want to discuss any of these issues more and solve them in your organization, give us a ring. I'll say the same thing for Jennifer on the legal side. Okay, so actually, Jennifer, you talked really well in our discussion session beforehand about you want a multidisciplinary team, but you also want Renaissance people in every role, I guess is the best way to describe it. You can't only know your role in this complicated digital world. Jennifer, I don't think you have a background in science, medicine,
No.
user experience design, systems engineering, software development, agile product ownership, but you work with those people. So I'll start with you and let's ask everybody. How do you learn about other disciplines, or what should you learn about the other disciplines so that you can be more effective?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the first thing is just like sitting in the room and hearing who is saying what about what. And that maybe sounds very obvious, but it's actually been something that, as I've watched other people do it or try to do it, it actually seems very hard, because everybody comes in thinking, I'm an expert in my field, so I can just jump into this meeting and I am just going to chime in with my little view of it. And it's like, well, you've been at this job for 2 days, maybe just like sit and listen a little bit first, right? And so I think it's finding the people on your own team, asking them, like, who do I need to talk to? What meetings do I need to get invited to? Who do I need to have lunch with? Who do I need to have a phone call with? Set all those meetings up, take the time. Like, that's what you do when you first start in a new company, right? It's establishing those relationships. And while I love remote work for many reasons, it does make it a little bit harder, but you have to put in the extra effort to like set those appointments up and really figure out what to go to. And even if someone says, well, this meeting might not be something you really need to be at, it's like, well, I will join, I will sit silently, and let me just listen and learn who the right people are, so that, to Larkin's point earlier about having an idea of what that SME is going to say to be able to make that first guess, you have to do this first step. Otherwise, you will have no idea. And so I think that's part of it, is saying, I haven't worked in the regulated industry before. Let me go talk to Jennifer or the regulatory person, the lawyer, whatever it is. I really don't know how this company approaches software builds. Let me find the people who can answer those questions, or who's in charge of figuring out how we design a clinical study. So some of it is just that sort of you have to have a little bit of the self-motivation to find the right folks, sit down and be willing to listen and learn, and know that you actually don't know everything for this particular company or this particular product, because it is different everywhere.
So the flip side question for all of you. So learn other groups, learn the people, learn a bit about their things so you can ask good questions. As sometimes we'll say, you don't have to understand their function, but you should be sophisticated enough to have a sniff test for something seems wrong based on my past experience. I don't know what problem is, but I'm raising my hand. On the flip side, do you ever have people who, for enthusiastic reasons, are called in but don't stay in their lane, like a privacy officer who starts debating the blue shade in the background, you know, like, where is it? Like, no, 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 actually, you're not really needed for this. Thank you, but you know, go away.
Yeah, I don't know if others want to chime in on that one.
Sure.
I'm everywhere. But,
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a delicate balance between in you know, in general in Agile with Agile teams, right? You're trying to promote T-shaped individuals, right? Depth in one area, but enough breadth that they can hook in and or lend a hand or help where needed, right? You'd sort of, I think there's, it helps to have self-awareness that where I am growing my T or this is way outside my lane. There's awareness that people need to have. You're going to have that in all kinds of circumstances. So, you know, I'm not sure that there's anything in particular you need to do about that other than foster the right kind of work to in helping people become more T-shaped in the right way, in a way that makes sense for the team and for your departments as well.
Right. And so another aspect of shift left, not necessarily shift left, but more of the cross-functional team building, is that it helps to bring in new blood to a team, right? You know, incredibly common for teams to get comfortable with their surroundings, the technology that they're using, the processes that they're following, whatever it is. And it really gets to be hard for people to break out of their bubbles. And when you bring in somebody from another department that has a different set of motivations, a different set of experiences, they may look at that blue shade and say, shouldn't that be green instead of blue? You know, and then people will look and like, oh, you're right. You know, I never would have thought about it, right? Because I've been used to it being blue forever, right? So I find it, you know, I get what you're saying, Randy. Like it can be somewhat challenging if somebody is really, you know, not contributing well to the conversation and they're trying to get outside of their lane, so to speak. But I find it actually very valuable to get the perspectives in other areas from the people in other roles and functions, because it does help us to break out of our bubbles.
Randy, I wanted to maybe look at one specific issue, and then maybe we could talk about how one might apply, let's say, shift left thinking to it, right? And so I'm thinking in particular about recalls, right? Some companies have more recalls than others. Some have them later than others, et cetera, right? And so if you're thinking about that, what are the kinds of, you know, things you could do to reduce recalls or reduce how long it takes to get to a recall as well? Because if you have a recall 2 years after the problem first started, that's a really long period of time in which a lot of bad things could have happened, right? Whereas if you have a recall that happens, you know, within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you could argue maybe we should have not released this thing in the first place, right? So what kind of things, if you're thinking about recalls, could you do to shift left around that? I have a bunch of ideas, but anyone else have
Can I
ones
clarify,
that
are
they
you
want to?
talking at the
Yeah,
moment when you realize you have a recall, or at the moment when you're planning for the eventuality of maybe needing a recall, or both?
all of those, right? I mean, you have to think about shift left throughout your entire product life cycle. You can apply it in different stages in there. So I will say one where where let's say you're already in market, right? And you've done what you've done, but you're in market on things that already. You don't you have whatever post-market surveillance you have right now. You have those types of things. In that case, you know, one of the things you could do is you could throw some AI at it, whatever signals there are, to see what are the most likely recalls or products that you might have danger of recalls on, right? that's something you could do for just with the tools that you have right now, right? So that you can potentially, if you can predict that stuff better earlier, you know where you might want to concentrate your efforts on in that. If you do it earlier in the process, right, thinking about what kind of signals could you have, how could you design your product or your ecosystem to get better signals for out of post-market surveillance, so that you can figure out earlier, hey, this is a problem, we may want to recall this, right? That's something you can do as part of your how you do product design, or how you do post-market surveillance. Those are a few of the things you can do. There's a lot of different ways you can apply it. What the right ones to do and where to invest your time and effort in terms of shifting left is, probably analyze your problems. Why are you getting as many recalls? Why are recalls increasing? Why are they as long as they are? And then you can figure out where to apply shift left techniques.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that also is about, on the front end, making sure that you've set up your hazard assessment, your risk analysis, all of those things appropriately, that you actually have defined specifications so that you know what you're looking for, so that when something comes in, you can see, are we in range or are we out of range? That allows you to make faster decisions. Or are we seeing something that, even though we're within the specs we originally set up, this is still kind of not really what we thought we would be seeing. So I think the first thing is making sure, and that's really that's left, right? That should be before you submit to the agency, before it's marketed, right? That you really have those good documents that are setting out exactly what you expect to see, how often you expect to see it, and what level of severity you expect to see it at. And that gives you a very quick overview of whether what you're seeing is consistent or not. The other thing that I see sometimes is that it can be really hard internally, and this I think goes back to some of the things that we've been talking about. Companies don't really know who to talk to when they start to see these track and trends that are sort of out of whack, right? Or that somebody might start to see something. It's who do you go to? Who actually makes the decision? Are you going to do a correct? It's not usually an actual physical recall, right? But are you going to do a correction? Are you going to do something? And do you need to? Who are the right people to get in the room at the right time to actually be able to make that decision in a timely fashion? And then I think the third thing, or maybe that is not the third, I've lost track, but the other thing is make sure that the company understands that this doesn't have to be seen as a bad thing, right? There's sort of this you don't want to have to do them, obviously, right? But if you look at FDA's database of recalls, corrections, removals for devices, a lot of it's there was a labeling thing, or this something that wasn't really that necessarily bad, and the company needs to understand this can be an okay thing to do, and it can actually be better for the company because it shows that you are paying attention to these things. You are taking the steps that you need in order to protect the people that are using your products. And, don't have that fear of oh my gosh, we have to do this. And it, there will be potentially downsides, but what's the downside of not doing it, right? And so I think just making sure that you set your processes up from the beginning, make sure you have those decision makers in the room as soon as you see anything that looks like maybe there's a problem. You don't have to wait until you know for sure there is.
I'll give you and I think that's that's spot on. I'll give you an anecdote. My sister-in-law is an electrophysiologist, and she uses so she does ablations, puts in pacemakers, etc. She uses products from a number of different companies. And I asked her one sort of reputation of these different companies, and she, without naming names, this company here, when they'll have recalls, but when they do, it's pretty much, before you even notice that there's a problem, there is a recall. This other company, every electrophysiologist is already talking about it, and they've known about this problem for 2 years, and then they have a recall. Which of those two companies would you like to be? I like to be the one where it's a much shorter process and it happens before an issue happens. That company has probably done a lot of shift left work to get there, and the other company has not. So I think ultimately that's especially in the world we are in now, where it is possible to get more data about what's going on faster. You have the ability to shift left more and be more like company A rather than company B.
But a lot of that is just it's very much agile philosophy, right? It's about making an hypothesis, knowing what you don't know, right? Knowing that it is that you have uncertainty in your hypothesis, and then you're developing a mechanism by which you can validate is, your hypothesis true or false, right? You're going to make those sorts of decisions all throughout your development process. You're going to make it about the product itself and how it performs in market, et cetera. And and as you're pointing up, Bernhard, right? I mean, as part of Shift Left, it's all about reducing those uncertainties, right? And confirming or validating early rather than late, but it's still all about the, really the scientific method, right? You're going to make a guess. You're going to create your experimental method to decide whether your guess was good or not, and then you're going to test it, right? And then you'll respond and iterate from there. So, it's really just about taking that scientific method, the agile philosophy in general, and just applying it everywhere.
So,
And then just looping back to Jennifer's comment of people not knowing who is in charge of that, how to do that, right? I think some of this is if we're building things that involve software, right? Software is malleable, software changes. We can incorporate feedback in much more easily and much more quickly than we can with some hardware where you've got a manufacturing plan and you've got I'm making 500,000 widgets and I've got to distribute, et cetera, et cetera. With more and more software in there, the benefit of being able to make those adjustments faster is magnified. And so if that is a bigger and bigger part of your process, having those fast feedback loops is super important, which means you have to organize yourself much more in terms of your total product life cycle, and not these people do this, these people do this, and they don't talk to each other. It is all about that feedback throughout the product life cycle. If you're not organized that way, then I would argue you're never going to be able to say, well, who is in charge of that? Well, it should be obvious if you're organized the right way who is in charge of it.
so I think this has been really good. There's one final question. There's others, but I'm sorry, everybody, we can't get to them all. Some of them don't quite fit in the flow. I think you'll all be yawning if we nail down every single one. But here's an interesting one that's really, I'll translate it to make it a little more practical, which is, hey, my team uses Jira for everything on our device. Does that mean that all 15 of these people need to be in Jira every day? Like, how do you practically engage somebody, and who has to actually be in which tools, and who can kind of live outside of that, especially if they're, you're in privacy and you're working with 30 teams and they may not even all be on the same tool sets. Like, how do you figure that piece out? Let's do a tactical wrap up.
I like Jira. I think it's a great tool for collaboration in a way. Actually, we'll use Notion a lot as another collaboration tool for doing requirements development. But what we're trying to avoid here is a situation where we have to write up a document and we have to throw it over the fence and hope somebody picks it up and reads it and then sends us back a response. I don't know, maybe nobody's old enough on this call to remember, but it used to be like at the grocery store, they had the vacuum system, right? We had a cylinder where you put the note in the cylinder, you have to be a check at the grocery store, right? You put it in the vacuum system, it gets sucked away, on the tube, and then its response will come back in the tube, right? It's like, we don't want to work that way. We want this to be very interactive. We want it to be real time, and we want it to be very collaborative. And people just have to be able to use the same tools, because if we're using different tools or even different approaches to using the tool, we're not going to be communicating effectively.
Yeah, and I think doesn't mean that right. The good news about a software tool like Jira, for example, is that you can have different views, different filters, different things that that some item can go through. Right, when we're doing user stories, there different people touch it at different times and look at it at different times. They get fed into a risk review process as well, right? So there's a stage where it's like ready for risk review. That feeds into that risk review process. Quality systems engineers are involved. The technical people, product owners are involved in that phase, typically in meetings, prep work for the meetings, go through, do whatever the activities are. And then you're using, again, something like Jira to just manage that workflow and to work through traceability and other types of things with that, especially with the right with the right tooling, risk management plugins, traceability plugins, etc., as part of the tool. A tool is just a tool. You can have tools that make your process easier and provide the right information to the right people along the way.
There really needs to be alignment across teams as to which tools the company wants to use and why. Because otherwise you have different teams that are like, I like Notion, I like Jira, I want to do Slack for everything. That rarely ends well, because then everybody's getting all these links to all these different tools, and somebody like me who is like, I don't know what we're doing in any of this or how to use any of this, then I just don't use it. And then I start just asking people to send me stuff, and they're like, oh, it's on this Notion page or it's in this document. And I'm like, that's a great story, send it to me. Like, I will never find it, right? Also for things like Slack, and this is my like legal regulatory head, like not a great place for like sending documents for red lines and things like that, right? Like stuff that you have to actually be able to like track changes and put into a system, or like be able to actually show what you are doing or the process for reviewing documents. Like you have to be, just because the system is available and like doesn't mean that it should be used for all purposes, right? And so I think that there has to be some thought given to the what and the why, so that things are still tracked appropriately. Like I don't want to get documents in Slack to redline and give back if it's like a promotional review, right? Like that has to go through a proper system to be able to say who looked at it, when they looked at it, what the edits were. You have to be able to see those revs, right? And not all the systems are built for that. So that would just be my like 2 cents on top of it. It's like there's a lot of stuff out there. Probably don't want to be using all of it at the same place.
Yeah, and some of those tools are really designed for real-time communication, like Slack, for example. And what I found, at least dealing with like privacy counsel, just as an example, is they don't want to be pinged every 20 minutes throughout the day with small questions, right? So for our requirements development process, we would have weekly check-in meetings, right? So we would kind of batch things together for privacy and just say, okay, here's a week's worth of questions that we came up with. We'll give it to you a couple days ahead of time, and then let's discuss it on Friday and clear them all out, or whatever, disposition them. And so, you have to be aware that, certain SMEs that are not significantly involved in the project, maybe they're, 2 hours a week kind of a level of engagement, they can't be asked to respond the way that somebody who's doing a 40-hour week on a project is expected to respond.
All three of you are nodding yes, so I feel like this is the moment to say thank you all for attending this webinar, but thank you all for turning out. We appreciate it. This will be posted on YouTube. You'll get a message shortly. We'll have a summary blog out after. Please share it with people. Please share the invites to these things with people. Bring a friend. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of our panelists. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.